Hello everyone, and welcome back to Stories by Emma, the place where real-life stories reveal how fragile family bonds can be when love and loyalty collide with money and entitlement. Tonight's story begins with Dorothy, a 68-year-old widow who lives alone in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Pennsylvania. Ever since her husband Robert passed away, she has carried the heavy responsibility of managing the large estate and multi-million-dollar trust fund he left behind. Robert had worked his entire life to build stability for their family, and Dorothy devoted herself to preserving that legacy, not because she craved control, but because she wanted her only son, Michael, to always have security. Bills, vacations, even private school tuition for his kids. Dorothy made sure everything was taken care of. Yet behind her generosity, a silent ache grew stronger year after year. What she longed for most wasn't another thank you card or a polished thanks, Mom, but something simple and priceless. Genuine love and respect. She wanted to be seen not as a checkbook, but as a mother, a human being who still mattered. That longing would turn into heartbreak the day Dorothy realized Michael no longer valued her as a person at all. The signs had been there: missed phone calls, shallow conversations, and a growing distance. But what confirmed it was a single moment so cruel it felt like betrayal. That moment, tied to something as ordinary yet meaningful as a birthday, became the spark that set everything in motion. Stay with me, because Dorothy's quiet strength and the choices she made after that moment will shock you and make you rethink what it means to be family. Dorothy's 68th birthday should have been a day filled with warmth, laughter, and at least a phone call from her only son. Instead, the house was silent. The hours ticked by, and there was no knock at the door, no ring of the phone, not even a simple text message. She tried to brush it off at first, telling herself that maybe Michael was busy with work or caught up with his children's schedules. But as morning turned into evening and then slipped into night, the sting grew sharper. For decades, Dorothy had made birthdays special for Michael. Balloons when he was a boy, surprise parties when he was in college, expensive gifts when he started his career. She never once forgot. Yet now, on her own special day, she felt invisible. The ache didn't come from the absence of cake or flowers, but from the realization that her existence didn't seem to matter enough to warrant even a few seconds of his time. 3 long days later, her phone buzzed with a short text. "Happy birthday, Mom." No exclamation point, no call, not even an apology for being late. It was as if her birthday had been an afterthought scribbled onto a to-do list. Dorothy stared at the glowing screen in disbelief. The message didn't feel like love. It felt like obligation, a careless gesture tossed her way. At that moment, something shifted deep inside her. This wasn't about a missed birthday anymore. This was about years of sacrifice, love, and loyalty being disregarded by the very person she had given everything to. That late, hollow text became the final straw. The moment Dorothy decided she would no longer allow herself to be treated as though she didn't matter. Dorothy sat in her quiet kitchen the morning after receiving that careless text, sipping her coffee slowly as the decision formed in her mind. For decades, she had carried the weight of the family trust, ensuring Michael and his wife Nora never had to worry about a mortgage, medical bills, or even the cost of their lavish vacations. Every month, Dorothy signed off on payments that kept their comfortable lifestyle afloat. But now, staring at the phone that had delivered her son's hollow birthday wish, she felt something snap. Why should she keep giving when her love was taken for granted? Why should she continue pouring money into the lives of people who couldn't even honor her with a simple call? That morning, Dorothy made a bold decision. She contacted the trustee and instructed them to freeze all distributions immediately. No more monthly checks. No more automatic transfers. Not a single dollar until further notice. At first, it wasn't about punishment. It was about clarity. Dorothy wanted to know if Michael would reach out when the money stopped flowing, and more importantly, she wanted to know why. Would he call out of genuine concern for her well-being, or only to demand an explanation about the missing funds? It was a test, one that Dorothy knew could finally reveal the truth about her son's heart. She felt both nervous and strangely liberated as she signed the documents that halted the flow of money. For the first time in years, she was no longer enabling Michael's entitlement. Instead, she was putting herself first. Little did she know, this decision would set off a chain of events more shocking and painful than she could have imagined. It didn't take long for the silence to break. Within days of the trust payments being frozen, Dorothy's phone lit up with frantic calls from Michael. At first, his tone was masked with concern. "Mom, are you okay? I noticed something strange with the account. Did the bank make a mistake?" But Dorothy could hear the edge in his voice. A nervousness that had nothing to do with her well-being and everything to do with money. Then came Nora, her daughter-in-law, who had never been subtle about her dependency on the trust fund. Nora's texts were filled with urgency. The mortgage was due, the kids' tuition bill was waiting, credit cards were maxed out. "Dorothy, you need to fix this immediately," one message read, as though she were nothing more than their personal banker. Dorothy stayed calm, watching the panic unfold. She waited to see if Michael would show up at her doorstep, not to demand, but to truly check on her. And yes, he did come by, but the visit felt rehearsed, his smile too polished, his words too sweet. He hugged her tightly, brought flowers, and asked how she was feeling, yet every sentence circled back to the trust. It was a performance, and Dorothy knew it. For years, she had ignored the signs, excused the entitlement, and convinced herself that money didn't change the bond between a mother and her son. But sitting across the table from Michael, watching his eyes dart nervously whenever she avoided the subject of money, she felt the truth hit her like a wave. The love he offered wasn't unconditional. It was transactional. And that realization pierced deeper than the birthday text ever could. Dorothy decided she couldn't let the performance fool her. She needed proof of what truly mattered to her son. That evening, she came up with a plan, one that would give Michael and Nora every chance to show their real intentions. She called Michael and told him, in a calm and measured voice, that the trust distributions would be paused for 30 days while she reviewed some legal matters. She didn't elaborate, didn't argue, and simply said it was temporary. But in her heart, she knew this was a test. For the next month, she would watch closely. Would Michael call to ask about her health, offer to spend time with her, or simply drop by just to share dinner like in the old days? Or would every conversation circle back to finances, bills, and the missing money? The first week was filled with exaggerated gestures. Michael showed up with groceries, Nora baked cookies, and the grandchildren left hand-drawn cards that seemed suspiciously polished for their age. Dorothy smiled politely but kept notes in a small journal, writing down every visit, every call, every word that hinted at their true motives. By the second week, the mask began to slip. Michael's calls grew shorter, his tone sharper. Nora stopped coming by altogether, instead sending pointed messages about how much pressure the family was under. Dorothy's heart sank, but she wasn't surprised. The 30-day window wasn't even over, and already the cracks in their affection were showing. Still, she remained silent, letting the days unfold, knowing this test would soon reveal everything she needed to know. By the third week, Dorothy's unease turned into suspicion. Michael's visits stopped completely, replaced by hushed phone calls she sometimes overheard when he thought she wasn't listening. One afternoon, while tidying the living room, she stumbled across a folder left behind on a chair. Inside were legal documents filled with her name. Her hands trembled as she skimmed the pages. It wasn't about helping her with finances or making her life easier. No, it was a petition for guardianship, claiming Dorothy was no longer mentally competent to handle her own affairs. The words cut like knives. Inability to manage assets, potential risk to estate, need for responsible oversight. She felt her knees weaken. Her own son was preparing to strip her of her independence and seize control of everything Robert had worked for. That night, Dorothy sat awake in her bedroom, staring at the old wedding photo of her and Robert. She whispered into the silence, "I thought we raised a good man." The betrayal was almost too heavy to bear, but the shock soon hardened into resolve. She wasn't losing her freedom. Not to Michael, not to Nora, not to anyone. The 30-day test had turned into something far darker than she imagined. It was no longer about proving whether her son loved her. It was about survival, dignity, and protecting the legacy she and Robert had built together. Dorothy picked up the phone the next morning, not to call Michael, but to reach out to a lawyer she trusted. The battle had begun. Dorothy met with her lawyer, a seasoned professional named Elaine, who had handled her estate paperwork years earlier and knew the trust inside and out. Elaine listened carefully, her expression tightening as Dorothy slid the guardianship petition across the desk. "This is serious," Elaine said, "but it also reeks of fraud. We'll need evidence." That's when she recommended bringing in a private investigator, someone who could quietly dig into Michael and Nora's finances, their behavior, and their real motives. Within days, a retired detective named Harris was on the case. He began tailing Michael's movements, tracing bank records, and speaking discreetly with people close to the couple. What he found confirmed Dorothy's worst fears. The lavish vacations had been funded on credit. Their home equity was nearly drained, and gambling debts were piling up under Nora's name. The trust money wasn't just a convenience, it was their lifeline, and without it, they were drowning. Dorothy sat with Harris and Elaine in her living room as they laid out photos, receipts, and recordings that painted a chilling picture of desperation. "They don't want to care for you," Harris said bluntly. "They want control of your estate to bail themselves out." The words stung, but Dorothy felt strangely stronger hearing them spoken aloud. She wasn't imagining things. She wasn't crazy, she was being targeted. And now, for the first time, she had allies at her side, people who believed her and were ready to fight with her. Dorothy straightened her shoulders, her voice steady. "Then we fight." Elaine and Harris wasted no time preparing the trap. They advised Dorothy to act as if nothing had changed. Answer Michael's occasional calls politely, nod along when Nora texted demands, and never let them suspect she knew the truth. Meanwhile, Harris compiled hard proof, casino footage of Nora signing markers, bank statements showing withdrawals that lined up exactly with past trust deposits, and even recordings of Michael boasting to a friend that, "Soon everything will be under my control once Mom's declared unfit." The evidence was damning. When the court date finally came for the guardianship petition, Dorothy arrived flanked by Elaine and Harris. Michael and Nora walked in confident, Nora wearing a smug smile as if victory was already theirs. But that smile faded the moment Elaine rose to speak. With calm precision, she presented document after document, photograph after photograph, unraveling the couple's web of lies. Gasps filled the courtroom when Harris played the recording of Michael's own words, his voice dripping with greed. The judge's face hardened as he turned toward Dorothy's son. "This petition is not only unfounded, it is a blatant attempt at exploitation." In that moment, Dorothy felt both heartbreak and relief. Heartbreak that her only child had tried to destroy her. Relief that the truth was finally out in the open. Michael sat pale and silent, Nora staring at the floor, their scheme shattered for everyone to see. Dorothy didn't gloat. She simply lifted her chin, a quiet strength radiating through her. She had survived their betrayal, and she had won. A week after evicting Michael and Nora, Dorothy sat once again in Elaine's office, this time with a calm resolve rather than panic. She spread her hands on the polished wooden desk and said, "It's time to make sure they never have another chance." Elaine nodded, already drafting the paperwork. Dorothy changed her will completely. Michael and Nora were removed as beneficiaries, their names struck out with finality. In their place, Dorothy designated a series of charities close to her heart. A scholarship fund for underprivileged students, a foundation supporting widows like herself, and a local animal shelter Robert had always donated to quietly. The family trust, once a lifeline for her son, was repurposed into something lasting and meaningful. As Elaine slid the new documents across for her to sign, Dorothy felt the pen steady in her hand. Each signature was not just a legal step. It was a declaration of independence, of self-respect, of choosing love and legacy over greed and betrayal. When the last page was done, Dorothy leaned back, a weight gone from her chest. She imagined Robert smiling at her choice, proud that their life's work would now help those truly in need. Outside, autumn leaves swirled across the street, marking the beginning of a new season in her life. The old Dorothy who allowed herself to be walked on was gone. The new Dorothy was in control, and her legacy was secured. That night, after the courtroom battle ended, Dorothy returned home with a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in years. For too long, her house had been filled with the noise of Michael and Nora's demands, their entitled presence turning her sanctuary into a place of stress. No more. The very next morning, Dorothy called a locksmith. By the afternoon, the locks were changed, and their keys were useless. When Michael and Nora showed up later, faces tight with anger, Dorothy met them at the door with Elaine by her side and Harris standing just behind. "This is my home," Dorothy said firmly. "You are no longer welcome here." Michael tried to bluster, shouting about rights and family loyalty, but his words carried no weight after what had been exposed in court. Nora sneered, muttering about ungrateful mothers, but Dorothy didn't flinch. She handed them each a small box containing the few belongings they had left in her home. "Take this and go. You've made your choices. I'm making mine." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the sound of Nora's heels as she stormed off the porch. Michael hesitated, his eyes searching his mother's face for even a flicker of weakness. But Dorothy's gaze was steady, unyielding. Finally, he followed his wife down the driveway. As their car pulled away, Dorothy exhaled a long, trembling breath. The house was quiet again, peaceful hers. The weight of years of manipulation lifted, leaving space for something new: freedom. Word of the courtroom fiasco and Dorothy's new will spread faster than Michael and Nora ever expected. Neighbors who once waved politely now crossed the street to avoid them. Nora's parents, embarrassed by the scandal, cut off contact, while Michael's old friends stopped returning his calls. Even at work, whispers followed him down the hallway, colleagues murmuring about the son who tried to rob his own mother. Nora's gambling debts caught up with her too. Calls from creditors turned to threats, and without the trust fund, there was no safety net. Their social media pages, once full of vacation photos funded by Dorothy's generosity, now sat abandoned, flooded with harsh comments calling them parasites and frauds. Michael tried to spin the story, claiming Dorothy had been manipulated, but no one believed him, not after the recordings played in open court. For the first time in their marriage, the couple found themselves truly alone, united only by resentment and regret. Meanwhile, Dorothy's extended family, cousins, nieces, even distant relatives, reached out to express their support. "You were brave," one cousin told her on the phone. "You showed all of us it's never too late to take a stand." Hearing those words, Dorothy realized she hadn't just saved herself. She had become an example of strength to others. And as Michael and Nora's world grew smaller and darker, Dorothy's life was opening wider than she ever thought possible. With Michael and Nora out of her life, Dorothy felt like she could finally breathe again. For the first time in decades, her mornings weren't filled with dread about phone calls asking for money or guilt-tripped visits. She started small, taking long walks in the park with a cup of coffee, stopping to watch children play or dogs chase after frisbees. She signed up for a watercolor painting class at the community center, something she had always wanted to try, but never felt free enough to do. Each brushstroke on the canvas became a quiet act of reclaiming herself. Dorothy also began volunteering at the local animal shelter Robert once supported, where she found unexpected joy in helping rescue cats and dogs find new homes. The staff welcomed her warmly, and soon she became known as Grandma D, the gentle hand who calmed even the most anxious pets. At night, she sat on her porch with a cup of tea, reading letters of thanks from the charities she now funded. For the first time since Robert's passing, Dorothy didn't feel lonely. She felt connected, purposeful, alive. The house that once echoed with tension was now filled with laughter from new friends and the soft purring of adopted kittens. Her life wasn't just moving forward. It was blossoming in ways she never imagined possible. Inspired by her own ordeal, Dorothy realized that her story wasn't unique. Far too many elderly parents were quietly suffering under the weight of manipulation, neglect, and financial abuse from the very children they had sacrificed everything for. With Elaine's legal expertise and Harris's investigative network, Dorothy launched the Sullivan Foundation for Elder Justice, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting seniors from exploitation. The foundation offered free legal consultations, financial literacy workshops, and even a hotline for the elderly to report abuse. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, local news outlets gathered, and Dorothy spoke with confidence. "I lost years of peace because I believed I had no choice but to endure mistreatment. I'm here to tell every senior, you are not alone, and you do have a choice." Her words drew applause, and for once, Dorothy didn't shrink from the spotlight. Donations poured in, and soon the foundation was partnering with national organizations. What had started as one woman's fight to reclaim her dignity was becoming a movement to safeguard countless others. Standing in front of the foundation's new office, Dorothy felt a deep warmth in her chest. This was bigger than her, bigger than Michael and Nora's betrayal. It was her chance to transform pain into power, and in doing so, leave behind a legacy far greater than wealth. Months later, Dorothy found herself standing on a brightly lit stage at the city's annual Community Impact Awards. The audience was packed with local leaders, families, and dozens of seniors whose lives had been touched by her foundation. As the announcer introduced her name, a wave of applause filled the hall, louder and longer than she ever imagined. Dorothy walked to the podium in a simple navy dress, her silver hair pinned neatly, her eyes shimmering with both humility and pride. She accepted the plaque engraved with her name, but to her, it felt like so much more. It was a symbol that her pain had been transformed into hope for others. Several elderly couples stood up to cheer, tears streaming down their faces, while a group of young volunteers she had mentored clapped until their hands were red. "This isn't just my award," Dorothy said, her voice steady. "It belongs to every senior who dared to speak up, every person who chose dignity over fear, and every ally who stood beside us." Cameras flashed, recording the moment that Dorothy became not just a survivor, but a respected advocate. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen, not as a mother, widow, or victim, but as a woman who had reclaimed her story. As the lights dimmed that night, Dorothy sat quietly with the award resting on her lap, reflecting on the long journey that had brought her here. From the heartbreak of being forgotten on her own birthday, to the betrayal of a son she once believed she couldn't live without, every painful step had carved the path to this moment of strength. She no longer measured her worth by the approval of her family, but by the impact she was leaving on the world. Looking into the camera for a final message, Dorothy's voice carried both warmth and conviction. "If you take one thing from my story, let it be this: love should never be measured in dollars, and family should never mean chains of guilt. You deserve respect, you deserve peace, and you have the right to choose freedom." She placed her hands together gently, smiling. "Thank you for listening, and if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, know that you are not alone. Share your story, stand up for yourself, and never be afraid to rewrite your future." The screen slowly faded, leaving only the words, "Subscribe to Stories by Emma for more real stories that remind us it's never too late to take back your life."